How can a people essentially lose every military conflict for 75 years and never admit defeat? Palestinians have been conquered, divided, displaced, and occupied, their leaders exiled or assassinated, and their cities are flattened again and again. But they haven't given up. They insist they haven't lost, and they may not be wrong. They're essentially defined by defiance, even when that defiance costs them almost everything. And it's odd. I mean, humans have been fighting each other over land since forever. Look at maps, and you'll see that virtually every national line has been drawn by force. And then people accept it. We don't see the countries that lost World War II still fighting it out for glory. The American South isn't still trying to break free, and America's native tribes, they're not firing rockets to reclaim their ancestral land. They've accepted their new reality in a way that the Palestinians never have, at a huge cost in lives and lifestyle. So what's going on? I'm Ken LaCourte, and here I research questions like this and give you what I learned in as fairly as a way as I can manage it. And the elephant in the room is this: why haven't Palestinians given up? I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. I'm just trying to understand why they haven't. Here's what I learned and what we'll cover. First, who are the Palestinians? Because it's not just one distinct group. Then we'll look at a different kind of defeat that was unlike so many world conflicts. Next, we'll see how powerful forces succeed in keeping them angry. And finally, at the logic of resistance, because there is a logic to it. We talk about Palestinians like they're one community with a shared reality. But in truth, there are very different groups of Palestinian people, and it's important to understand that to answer our question. Now, someday I'll do a whole video on the founding of Israel, but for now, let me boil it down into 75 words. Prior to 1948, there were Jews and Arabs living under British rule in what was called Mandatory Palestine. More Jews came after the Holocaust, and the UN proposed a partition in 1947. Jews accepted, Arabs refused. Israel declared independence in 1948. The Arab states immediately invaded, and Israel won. About 250,000 Arabs stayed in the new country, while the rest were either expelled or fled in what the Arabs call the Nakba, meaning catastrophe. Of the descendants who stayed, there are now about 2 million Arabs living in Israel proper, and they make up about 20% of the population. They vote, hold Israeli passports, they even serve in parliament. Most identify as Arab Israeli or Palestinian Israeli, and they're not as eager as those living outside of Israel to burn it all down. They've built lives and families. Overall, they have a lower standard of living than Jewish Israelis, but a higher one than most Arabs in the Mideast. And about 80% say they're satisfied with their lives. Close to 3 million Palestinians live in the West Bank, and they're officially governed by the Palestinian Authority. But Israel controls security, settlements, and most of the land. The Palestinian Authority survives on foreign aid and Israeli coordination. Its schools, police, and bureaucrats depend on that pipeline. It's a volatile area with lots of poverty. Then there's the Gaza Strip, which we're now all familiar with, and it holds about 2 million people. It's densely populated, and almost half of its residents are children. In 2005, Israel withdrew its troops and settlers, and control of Gaza passed to the Palestinian Authority. But after both an election and a lot of killing, the militant group Hamas seized power in 2007. Hamas was the government of Gaza for 20 years, albeit under pretty tight Israeli sanctions, aimed at stopping missile attacks that never really stopped. Billions of dollars of foreign aid poured into Gaza, but a lot was diverted from infrastructure and building a society into the means of resistance: rockets, tunnels, weapons. After every round of destruction, Hamas staged victory parades, insisting that surviving was proof of their success. They measured progress not in jobs or schools, but in defiance. If they were still able to fight back, they were victorious. Each ceasefire was a pause before the next round of resistance. And finally, there were the people who were displaced throughout the world, the diaspora. Over 7 million Palestinians live outside of Israel in the territories. Most are living in other Arab nations, with some still refugees, while others are more integrated into their home countries. For most of them, the struggle for independence is still strong, and many are involved politically, from protests to campus activism. But it's a very different world than those who live in Gaza and the West Bank, where the struggle often comes with bloodshed and destroyed homes. With the somewhat exception of those living within Israel, across the Palestinian world, in Gaza, the West Bank, the diaspora, one idea runs deep: never concede 1948. To surrender would be to erase the very story that defines them. So the struggle continues, against Israel for some, and more broadly, against the idea of defeat itself. Now, one vital element to understand is that as awful as the Nakba was for people losing their homes and their homeland, it wasn't the kind of murderous defeat that so often accompanies war. Look at the Axis powers in World War II. 7 million Germans died, about 10% of their total population. Japan saw 2 to 3 million deaths, and about 500,000 in Italy. Until the recent Gazan war, a relatively small numbers of Palestinians have actually died at the hands of Israel, a little under 15,000, which translates to fewer than 200 a year. That's not nothing, but that's not in the same league as deaths in a major war. This time, though, the war in Gaza was different. Hamas says that 67,000 people died, which is just under 3% of its population. That's significant and is by far the biggest pain that any Palestinian faction has endured. And it's yet to be seen how that might change the equation moving forward. But another factor in this whole conflict that we have to look at is God. For Palestinians, it's never been only about borders. It's also been about sacred land that they believe God himself entrusted to them. Jerusalem is more than a capital city. It's Al-Quds, Islam's third holiest city after Mecca and Medina. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, perched on what Jews call the Temple Mount, is central to the story of the Muslim faith. It's been a site of pilgrimage and prayer for centuries. For Palestinians, it's also a symbol of divine trust. It's land that belongs to God, not governments. So Hamas's founding charter, for instance, declared all of Palestine a sacred Islamic trust that could never be given up. There's no room for nuance or negotiation. Compromise would be heresy and a betrayal of the faith. Religion and nationalism are so completely blurred together that they almost become the same cause. And that mix of religion and politics, it's reshaped generations. Palestinian textbooks, under both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, show the entire map from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean labeled as Palestine, with no Israel at all. School lessons describe the land as a religious endowment that can't be surrendered. They teach that the land is sacred, that the struggle is eternal, and peace with Israel is impossible. Murals in West Bank town show rifles crossed over the map of Israel. Embroidered wall hangings found in homes and offices depict Palestine covering the full outline of the country. A student walking to school might pass streets named after martyrs, like suicide bombers, gunmen, or teenagers who died confronting Israeli soldiers. Each name reminds them of the message that the fight is holy and to die for Palestine is glorious. Like this children's music video called When We Die as Martyrs. It's performed by a Jordanian Palestinian children's choir, and the kids are smiling and cheerful and acting out being shot to death by Israeli soldiers and rising to heaven. For many Palestinian children, this kind of message is normal. They grew up surrounded by symbols of loss and sacrifice, talking about death in explicit terms well before we talk about it to kids. To them, heroism means dying for a land you've never seen. TV programs, songs, school maps, they all teach that resistance is moral and spiritual. It comes from the pulpits as well. Friday sermons across the West Bank and Gaza, imams evoke the duty of jihad to liberate Al-Quds. They quote verses about divine victory over oppressors. They crowd responses with chants of, "With our blood and souls, we will redeem Al-Aqsa." But the Palestinians have also had another huge reason to keep on fighting, and that's outside forces who have kept the conflict hot. But before I get to that, let's talk for a minute about how the media could twist your brain without you realizing it. You know what a straw man argument is, where someone grabs the weakest point from the other side, knocks it down, and calls it a win. Now imagine the media doing that with people every day. And they do. The media takes the most controversial or unappealing politician's other side and gives you essentially cartoon versions of them. I knew this was true, but I couldn't quantify it until I started using Ground News, today's sponsor. They specialize in gathering and comparing news from over 50,000 sources, so you get the full picture of what's happening. They show you who covers what, and just as importantly, what news outlets ignore. So when your Democrat friends think that the GOP is defined by Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, it's because liberal media covers them more. And when your Republican friends think Democrats are only Ilhan Omar and AOC, That's because Fox News and conservative outlets talk more about them. Ground News proves it. This story about Marjorie Taylor Greene saw 69% of coverage from the left, while this story about Ilhan Omar saw 85% of coverage from the right. Both of these stories are what Ground News calls blind spots, meaning if you only read news from one side, you would have completely missed these stories. I check Ground News every day to stay fully informed, and if you want to give it a try, you can get 40% off of their Vantage plan with the link down in the description. ground.news/elephants, or scan the QR code here. Back to the Palestinians. Because faith alone doesn't keep that fire burning, politics does too. Especially when powerful neighbors and global institutions find it useful to keep Palestinians angry and fighting. And at the top of that list was Iran and Qatar. Iran was Gaza's largest sponsor, giving $70 to $100 million a year to Hamas. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard supplied missiles, drones, military training, both inside Iran and via Hezbollah in Lebanon. They taught Hamas militants advanced munitions and tunnel warfare at Revolutionary Guard bases and helped them build Gaza's weapons industry, rocket assembly, explosives, and drone modification using smuggled components and local manufacturing in Gaza. Qatar played a different role, giving money, refuge, and a megaphone. Doha transferred more than $1.8 billion to Gaza. These monies, coordinated at times with Israel and Washington, were officially designated for civil servant salaries, fuel, and social aid, but they also helped keep Hamas's administration running. There's a reason why Trump went to Qatar, the first U.S. president to ever do so, to try to bring an end to that war, and literally made Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly apologize for an attack on Hamas leadership inside of Qatar. When you have outside countries pouring that kind of money into a conflict, that conflict doesn't end. Other Arab countries played a role too, by refusing to let refugees become citizens, or sometimes even to enter their borders at all. That left Gazans, for instance, essentially trapped. Israel would only take in some temporary workers, and while refugees could have fled through the Rafah Gate, controlled by Egypt, no Arab countries would accept them. Now, that's a long story, and I explained it in the most watched video by far that I've ever produced. But the short answer is that the Arab countries had two reasons for it. One was to keep a thorn in the side of the Jewish state. It's certainly been harder for Israel to survive, and perhaps even expand, as they've been fighting insurgency throughout its whole history. The other reason is that the religious and ethnic groups of the Mideast are tricky. You have Sunni, Shia, Christians, Jews. A large influx of Palestinian refugees can create problems for a host country, and it's happened routinely. One of the many examples to look at is Jordan, which was both an exception and a cautionary tale. After 1948, Jordan eventually granted citizenship to many West Bank Palestinians, and even considered them full Jordanians. But by 1970, the Palestinians had spawned militant factions that challenged the Jordanian king's rule, and that ended in bloodshed and crackdowns. For various reasons, every Arab capital has declared loyalty to Palestine, yet none wanted the Palestinians themselves. Arab unity means acting outraged on TV on behalf of the Palestinians, and then not absorbing them into their countries. But finally, it's not just Arab governments keeping the cycle alive. The international system built around Palestinian refugees has turned temporary relief into a permanent institution. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, was created in 1949 to help the roughly 750,000 people displaced by Israel's creation. Over 70 years later, it would make sense for it to be obsolete, but instead they now register 6 million refugees, counting not just those who fled, but all their descendants. So if your great-great-grandfather left Jaffa in 1948 and you're born in Jordan in 2020, you're officially a refugee too, with a right of return to a country you've never seen. No other population on Earth passes refugee status like that through generations, like an inheritance. And UNRWA doesn't aim to resettle people. Its job is to maintain them. It runs more than 700 schools for about a little over 500,000 children. It employs 30,000, mostly Palestinian staff, and spends about $1.6 billion a year. It's one of the UN's largest agencies in existence, and it reinforces the idea that refugeehood is permanent. The same goes for many Western countries. And there's an entire aid industry that now depends on the Palestinian issue never being resolved. Now, I want to be careful about that because they are helping people, But often assistance and enabling can go hand in hand and keep a situation going on. The result of all of these outside powers is a web of interests invested in keeping Palestinians angry and stateless. Each side insists it's helping, yet together they've built a system where the only renewable resource seems to be outrage. But the last major point I'll make is that for outsiders like me, it's easy to look at so many Palestinians and see how much resistance has harmed their lives. But the logic of resistance is that it's actually working for them. They literally don't have an army, and in many ways they're winning a war. And they can point to real victories, like Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon in 2000. For most of the Arab world, that was the first real victory against Israel, and it didn't come from negotiations or treaties. It came from guerrilla warfare. Hezbollah spent years bleeding Israel with roadside bombs and ambushes. Eventually, Israel pulled out without a peace deal. Hezbollah's leader, he celebrated it as a divine vindication. He promoted the idea that perseverance and sacrifice could overcome Israel's strength. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew all troops and settlers from the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Ariel Sharon said it was a practical move to cut losses and disengage. Hamas saw it as a victory. They staged massive parades in Gaza's abandoned settlements. Leaders stood on rooftops shouting that the resistance drove the occupiers out. Every Hamas spokesman has since repeated the same version of that idea, that armed struggle works and cooperation doesn't. The Oslo peace process, with its endless talks, Western aid, and photo ops, it gave Palestinians no state, no sovereignty, and no dignity. But rockets and martyrdom, to them, got results. Even temporary ceasefires reinforce that logic. Every time Israel halts a campaign before fully crushing Hamas, militants call it victory. If they're still standing, still able to fire rockets and still alive, they've won. Survival itself is the victory, and they believe this shows that Israel can destroy buildings, but not their willpower. And because this conflict plays out for the whole world, moral victories often matter more than military ones. Images of devastation like flattened neighborhoods, bloodied children, and refugees digging through rubble, that generates outrage around the world. And international sympathy becomes another weapon. For a people with no tanks or planes, the ability to sway public opinion is power. Every condemnation of Israel at the UN, every campus protest, every viral photo of destruction is seen as proof that steadfastness is working. The longer they hold out, the more the world listens. But again, the cost of that mindset is huge. Israel left Lebanon in 2000, and 6 years later, Hezbollah's victory led to war again. Southern Lebanon was pounded by airstrikes. Beirut's suburbs were demolished, and more than 1,000 Lebanese civilians were dead. By 2024, Hezbollah started attacking Israel again in the north, and Israel fought back hard. Gaza, same story. Beyond the thousands of people killed, the region's infrastructure is gone, half the population displaced, and there was almost nothing left to rebuild with. And yet, Hamas leaders again called it a victory. And maybe it will be. As I record this, there's a very shaky peace plan in place. It may all fall apart, or it may lead to a Palestine that becomes a place where Palestinians want to live. But what's clear is that after 75 years, the Palestinians have mastered the art of not losing. But even when most countries lose a war, they have a tendency to integrate back into the world. They usually don't stay isolated and, well, kind of crazy like North Korea. Have you ever wondered why that place is less like a country and more like a cult? I mean, it's weird. And how did it happen? I did my best to answer that in this video here. Hey, I'm Ken LaCourte. I hope you got something good out of this. I appreciate you watching. Come back again.